Hi, and welcome back to everything I know about chronic insomnia. Well done for making it this far. I know, as I said previously, that this is not how maybe anybody wants to spend their day. If you're having bad nights and then you're actually putting in the time to work through these videos or any other resources on this difficulty, books or other podcasts or whatever, already give yourself a huge well done, because I know from experience that isn't easy to turn up for these things, because when you've had bad nights, you just want to be as far away from the issue of sleep as you can get during the daytime. So yeah, keep going. You're doing really well. In this video, I want to talk about philosophy, which, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about the plan for this series of videos, is a weird one. Nobody talks about philosophy, certainly not in the medical establishment. If you go, we live in a very sort of pharmaceutical centric medical system. If you go to a doctor, first of all, they don't really have the time for you to delve into something as complicated as this. Certainly in the UK, you get like an 8 to 10 minute appointment, and invariably you might get some printed advice about sleep hygiene and things, but invariably you're going to get pills, and that has its place. But there really isn't the time, or maybe even the inclination for taking a philosophical approach to this. And for me, I found it hugely empowering, not just in terms of sleep, but in terms of other areas of my life as well. So if this is a bit of a curveball for you and you weren't expecting this one, or I guess you were, because I mentioned in the opening video we'd be doing it, but it's worth sticking around for this. I think it has a lot to offer, and it's very open-ended. It's not like you have to do X, Y, Z, and I think it has something that can potentially help you. So yeah, let's take a look. The first thing to look at philosophically for me that really helped was the idea that this is your challenge. And what I mean by that is everybody gets something. Okay, so think about the people you know. Certainly, if I think about the people I know, there isn't really anybody that doesn't have some major challenge in their life. And it may not always be something physical. It can take many forms, but there's normally one, sometimes unfortunately a couple, but certainly one major challenge that somebody has in their life that frames a lot of what they do and who they are, or certainly what they do, and how they go about their life, and the restrictions they believe themselves to be under. This is yours, okay? So if you look at it sort of pragmatically, prosaically, philosophically, you were going to get something. Now, you could argue that, well, it is possible to live in complete harmony, and, well, yeah, fine, okay, we're hopefully going to get to that point if we can crack insomnia. But at the moment, take it that this is your thing. You don't have other things. Not all other things, anyway. I'm not saying there's nothing else going on in your life. But if there are other things going on in your life, they may well be related to insomnia or have the same root cause. So this is your challenge. And by comparing yourself to others, which I've done for many, many years, thinking everybody else sleeps great, why is it just me being persecuted? And that is a very strong word that came up for me, persecution. It sounds kind of ridiculous and self-pitying, but it does feel like that when you don't get such a fundamental thing necessary to live. But yeah, this is your thing. If it weren't this, then statistically you'd probably have had another thing. So you can kind of maybe take some consolation from that everybody has something going on in their lives. And when you have your thing, whatever your challenge is, in our case insomnia, ours is always the worst one. And this is where we get into self-pity, because we are closest to our own experience. Of course we are. We don't know anybody else's experience. We can kind of see other people's experiences at a sort of arm's length basis. We can talk to them, we can see if they're struggling, we can learn about what they're going through, but we're never going to get close to what it is to actually experience it and to feel what they go through. Whereas our challenge, be it insomnia or anything else, obviously it's a felt experience, it's a lived experience, and so it's 10 times worse, it's a million times worse in our heads than anybody else's. So when you're going around thinking this is the worst thing that could happen to anyone, it isn't the worst thing that could happen to anyone. Everybody's major challenge in life is the worst thing that could happen to anyone. So we tell ourselves as a story. So that then leads to self-pity, but it's only because we feel it, whereas others can only see the effects of it when they talk to us or see how we're feeling. But then, of course, we have the same thing about their challenges. We can't feel it. We can just see at a very sort of distant level what that challenge is. So that can help you contextualize your own challenge with insomnia and realize that, of course, it feels like the worst thing in the world. It's the only thing that you feel. It's the only challenge you're close to. Other challenges are not felt in the same way. The next thing that was an interesting one for me, and by the way, these are all from various teachers that I've followed. In the next, I think it's the next video or at some point, yeah, we're going to talk about resources like books and things and certain videos that have helped me. All of these things have come from different teachers, and when I say teachers, I don't mean people that I've gone to see in person necessarily, but philosophers and what some people might call spiritualists online. I'm not a religious person, so I don't mean that in a sort of religious sense, but people who talk about, you know, the nature of being, how we get caught up in ego. I suppose you could call it a very Eastern centric way of looking at things, but it's been very helpful. So yeah, these have come from those sort of people who have helped millions of people. I mean, to give you an example, there's a guy called Sadhguru who is an Indian philosopher. You may have heard of him. He has like 10 million subscribers on YouTube, and I'm not the kind of person that's really impressed by metrics and stuff, but you know, it's hard to ignore when that's the kind of reach that he has, and he just basically goes around the world attending these talks and helps people with their problems and gives them a sort of an Indian philosophical way of looking at them. But yeah, enough background. So things should not be this way. This is a really interesting statement because it's an example of us rebelling against what is. And if things are this way, it's actually it's very human-centric and arrogant for us to say that they should not be this way. On what basis do we make that assertion? Things are this way. So it doesn't really make any sense. And you can take that to its sort of most ludicrous conclusion and an extent. If you say that my football team should not be losing, should not be getting relegated, well, if they weren't, somebody else's football team would be. And the universe can't give you both of those things where everybody stays, you know, every football team doesn't get relegated and doesn't lose matches. So when you say that things should not be this way, what we're often saying is that things should be a different way, and sometimes that implies that for other people things should be worse. You know, I should have got that job. Well, if you had, then somebody else wouldn't have got it. And what claim can you make that the universe should have gone in your way? And when I say the universe, I'm not getting into the whole spiritual aspect of, you know, there's a guiding universe and stuff, but if it helps you to look at it that way. But I just say the universe in terms of like the way things go, and we're not really in control of that. So when you say things should not be this way, this is not how my life should be, you can use that to empower yourself to do what you can, and some of that which we're talking about in this video series, to change things. But the idea that things should just automatically and as a given not be this way is only going to lead you to more resentment, because you're operating from a position of I have been dealt an unfair hand, rather than I have ended up in this position for various reasons, many of which were not my fault, maybe most of which were not my fault, but there are reasons, and there's a bunch of things I can do about it, which is a much more positive way of framing it. Now, we talked about challenging negative thoughts earlier, where we looked at in the video about how we got to this point, you know, and how part of that was reinforcing negative beliefs. And from a philosophical perspective, we want to challenge those beliefs. Okay, so the idea that you're broken, and I mentioned before that that's one that I came back to again and again and again. This idea that I'm broken, I'm physiologically broken. There's something wrong with my brain that just doesn't know how to sleep anymore. Everybody else does it. Something's happened to me. Some complicated set of neurons or neural pathways in the brain has become severed. I mean, you go into all this kind of ludicrous detail that you have no qualifications to talk about, but that's what I did. But any negative thoughts, you know, you have to challenge those, because as I mentioned earlier, if you don't challenge them, then you create a reality that is centered on those beliefs, and those beliefs will manifest. You've probably heard the whole sort of, law of attraction thing, and you manifest what you believe and all that stuff. I mean, these are very loose concepts. I'm not saying I believe them, but the root of them is this idea that you bring about your own reality. People take it to ludicrous degrees. You know, the law of attraction says if you believe one thing, it will turn up in your life, which, you know, in certain ways is obviously nonsense. But in ways where you can control the narrative, and maybe your life is currently shaped by your own beliefs, that is absolutely true. If you can turn around those thoughts, you will start finding that your experience changes. And as long as you reaffirm those beliefs that you are broken, that you're, you know, all these terrible things you might be telling yourself, it's only going to breed more of it. You know, it's kind of like the whole hate breeds hate thing. It's also very important to notice when you contradict your beliefs about sleep, and in doing this, you come back to reality. Because what we do when we have, when we're sort of in the rabbit hole of depression and anger and resentment about insomnia or anything, we're actually not present. And I'm going to talk about being present, as you can probably see in a couple of points' time. But if you're not present and you're not rooted in reality, then you're based in illusion. And that's a very dangerous place to go. A lot of the world is rooted in illusion. People do all kinds of things, invent all kinds of stories to stay away from what actually is and what is reality. And you probably don't have to think too hard about examples of that, where people are just utterly caught up with stories and narratives and delusions, as I say. So if you can start to notice times when you contradict your beliefs about sleep, then you empower yourself. Because what happens is we are attuned to the bad times, okay? So you will notice much more easily when you have bad nights and bad periods, because they reaffirm your narrative. You are actually, in one sense, looking to have those bad nights because you have already decided that you are broken and you sleep badly. And it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy and vicious cycle. You tell yourself you sleep badly, although ostensibly you wish you didn't, but by doing that and constantly looking for it and reconfirming it, you cause it to happen more often. You know, the brain gives you what you tell it. It will basically do what you tell it. So we actually spend much less energy sort of conveniently ignoring the times when we contradict our narratives. So I've had some very eye-opening experiences with therapists where I've made journals and diaries and actually gone through actual facts and realized that things are not as I was telling them. Now, that doesn't mean everything was great and I was sleeping perfectly, but it does mean that I was giving myself a very unfair story. So when you're having good nights or good periods, make sure to notice them. And this goes for other areas of your life as well. Make the effort to notice and be present about what actually is true, rather than just these sort of lazy stories that we've got used to telling ourselves. The other thing that I found very helpful with insomnia is to think of life in terms of good times and bad. Now, obviously this doesn't apply to just insomnia. If you see your life as cyclical, and you sort of zoom out from the mire that you might be in right now, if you zoom out, you can see that actually there's peaks and troughs, and there's good times and bad. So if you imagine you're looking at a sound wave, like really zoomed in, you can just see some really tiny amount of detail. But if you zoom out and see the whole sound wave, you can see what its overall shape is, and there's going to be peaks and troughs. So take consolation from the fact that although you may be in a bad period right now, it isn't always like this. Now, what I've learned is that when I'm in a bad period, it's amazing what my brain will do to slip back into that lazy narrative about how I'm broken and I never sleep. And I'll talk about how I never sleep, I never have good nights, I'm never happy. Now, these things are not true, but when I'm in a bad period, I say them as though this bad period is how life always is. And it's like I said in the last point, you have to take extra extra energy to notice when you're basically not being truthful and not being fair to yourself. Because what you're doing is you're venting and you're just kind of dumping, getting these thoughts out, this anger and resentment out. But you do have good times and bad. And when you're in good times, live more. that's when you can broaden your horizon and do things that you don't feel you can currently when you're not sleeping well, like going out, seeing friends, or staying up late or whatever. That's your time. So you have good times and bad. It isn't always as we feel it is when times are bad. However pervasive that becomes, it's important to remember that there are good times as well. When I'm in bad times, I literally can't remember what it's like to sleep well, even though maybe just the week before I did sleep well. And I can't remember what it's like to not have to try to go to sleep, for it to just happen naturally, even though the week before that completely happened several nights in a row. So beware of being in this mire and telling yourself that this is how it always is, because it isn't always like this. Related to that, when you are struggling, what we do is we shrink our world, and this is a very dangerous point, but it is an understandable one, where we shrink our world to accommodate insomnia. And I say it's a dangerous point because what happens is you then start building your life around a problem, and in doing that, you take on the problem as your sole identity. I mentioned in an earlier video that you can become your problem. You sell yourself to other people as this problem. You caveat everything you say or do with this problem, and you probably don't have to think too hard to think of people who are very caught up and identified with their particular challenge. How often have you met people or talked to people, particularly older people, and you're only a couple of sentences in before they tell you about their troubles and their physical difficulties or their illnesses. And it seems way too soon in the conversation, or maybe you don't even really know these people. I've had this quite a few times. You get identified with it, and what then happens is you shrink your world to match. Now, there's a quote I have here from another philosopher called Osho, who was a very influential Indian philosopher, I think in the 60s, 70s, who said that comfort zones are a form of death. Now, comfort zones are important because, as I mentioned in a previous video, I think in the coping video, the first priority is to feel safe. That is the first priority. Never mind living wildly and expanding your horizons and going out and seeing friends and stuff. No, that all comes later. The first priority is to feel safe. So comfort zones are very important for that, but they can become oppressive and they can keep you in a very shrunken world. And so when you are having good times, it's important to live and not stay within that comfort zone. And you might justify staying in that comfort zone, well, as sort of like, well, okay, I had a good night last night, or I'm in a good period, but I never know what the next night is going to be. So I kind of, I never push the boat out, I never go on holiday, I never see people. But in doing that, you exacerbate the problem. It's very important to be present. I touched on being present a moment ago. This is something that is a disease in the modern world. Maybe the world that's always been, is that people are not present. People live in the past and the future. There's a lot of different schools of philosophy that talk about how all of our problems are in the in the past and the future. There's actually very little problem in the present. Even if something is going on for you, if you're truly in the here and now, it just is what is. And it's much less of a problem. Where we get upset, where we carry on grudges and get angry and commit violence to other people or ourselves, is with these stories. And stories need a past and or a future. And if you can bring yourself back to the present and notice yourself getting caught up in stories about the past, it's so freeing. It allows you so much more energy that you were previously using for maintaining grudges against people, for example. I've seen that in a lot of people. I've had my share of that and learned to let go. Or trepidation about the future, which almost certainly isn't going to turn out the way you think it is. Again, this is sort of the irrational mind. We are programmed to plan for the future and sort of problem solve. But actually, if you looked at your success rate for predicting exactly how the future will go, it's almost going to be 0% in terms of complete accuracy. So the only thing you have is the present moment. It's the only thing you can fully know. The past is a set of stories. The mind and the memory isn't even reliable, by the way. There's a lot of science about this, about how what we think we remember as memories is actually the mind and the brain filling in blanks. But yeah, I'm getting slightly off topic there. And the future, as I say, is not here and isn't going to pan out the way exactly that you think it is. So in terms of insomnia, that helps us because a lot of the problem is in the past and the future. In the past, it manifests in the sense of, this has been going on too long. How much damage has it done to me? How can I have been doing this for the last 10, 15, 20 years? It's a completely unhelpful thought. It doesn't bring you anything. It just makes you feel worse. And it's also irrelevant because whatever you think about the past, it is gone. What you have is the present moment. It's the only place and time when you actually get to act. You can't act in the past and you can't act in the future because by the time that future comes, it is then its own present moment. And in terms of the future, we sit ruminating, don't we, about how much more of this? How much more of this? I've already lost so much. Is it another year, 5 years, 10 years? Is it the rest of my life? Will I never be able to do X, Y, Z again? What will it do to me? Again, these are just as poisonous thoughts as the ones centered on the past. And without getting too soppy or anything, if I could try to convey one message to the entire world, it would be the importance of loving yourself. There is nothing more important in the entire world, and I mean that with complete seriousness. The primary love has to be for oneself, because if you don't love yourself, you can't love anything else. It's just self-evident. And if you are not in that position, and if we're honest, a great deal of us do not have unconditional self-love in a complete sense. If you can get to that point, you accept everything. All of the things I've talked about in this video, all the things above that point, become completely academic, because you love yourself and accept yourself such that you accept everything about yourself, and that includes the parts that perhaps you wouldn't design, like poor sleep. What's really interesting with this idea of loving yourself is that we can show up our own bias and inconsistency when we start to think about this in terms of another being or another person. So if you think about somebody or some animal or whatever that you love unconditionally, you have only loving thoughts for, and they asked you, if it's an animal, you might have to, there's a leap of imagination there with them asking you a question. But if they asked you, should I love myself? Your instant answer, of which you would be completely sure, would be yes, yes, yes. Because you see them as utterly beautiful, and it goes back to that idea of you see them on a surface level, you don't know their experience, and so it's much easier for the brain to love something external than yourself. And so if it's true of others that you think they should love themselves because you see them as so perfect and beautiful, then it has to be true of you as well. The rules can't be different for you. The only difference with you is that you are much closer to your own experience, and therefore bad feelings that arise from that experience. But if you can love yourself, not only do we solve all of the world's problems if people can love themselves. It really is its own set of videos, and I'm not really qualified to give it. But there's books on this. There's philosophers much more wise than I am that talk about this kind of thing. But all of the wars, all of the problems go away if people can just actually love themselves. And don't be fooled into thinking that it's egotistical to love yourself, which a few people have told me. That is to misunderstand what self-love is. We're not talking about being obsessed with your hair, or spending ages in the mirror, or being so caught up with designer clothing and that stuff. I mean, that's where people talk about narcissism and things, although even that is only one particular form of narcissism. We're talking about loving yourself at a very deep level, in the sense of accepting yourself and all of your challenges and all of your particular ways of being you. And yeah, that can't really be overstated. And very finally, I've mentioned this in a previous video, but it can't be said enough about the importance of accepting. And all of these things are tied together. So if you love yourself, you will automatically accept. If you can accept things, that will automatically speed along the process of learning to love yourself. The more you can accept, the less you fight and the less you resist. And the less you resist, the more space and peace you make for healing to happen. So this is the time to stop fighting yourself because you don't believe that things should be the way they are. They are the way they are, and you have the option of resisting it to no effect, or of accepting it, and that's when we can then move forward. So just to round off this section on a philosophical outlook on our insomnia, I mentioned that I would tell you about a few teachers that have been very helpful to me, and I've listed them here for you, so feel free to check out their materials. They span a wide range of different outlooks and philosophies and cultures, and even time periods. Someone like Alan Watts is going back a bit now. Eckhart Tolle is still very much current. Krishnamurti, I think he died in about 1980 or something, but he's probably been the one that's had the biggest impact on me. But all of these have books. The current ones have YouTube channels like Eckhart Tolle and Bert Harding. Sadhguru, I mentioned before, has a very large number of subscribers, and he has a massive organisation of all kinds of good works that he does. So yeah, check them out. Bert Harding, for example, he has a series of, or he did, I don't know if he still does them because he's quite old now, but he has a series of videos where he held what he calls satsangs, which are basically group meditations. And I don't mean meditations in the sense that you might take that like sitting quietly in a room, but sort of meditations as in discussions on things about life, on being present, on how we deal with suffering, on what it means to love yourself. Eckhart Tolle has a very influential book called The Power of Now, which I definitely recommend reading. Another one of his is called A New Earth, and the premise of these essentially is to be present, and that now is all you have, and that we are caught up in our ego, which is essentially the part of ourselves that is just nothing but stories, rooted in the past and the future, as I mentioned before. And Krishnamurti, as I mentioned, has probably had the biggest effect on me because he is very no nonsense, very pragmatic. He doesn't dress anything up in soft soap, anything. He was sometimes can seem even like I like to think of him almost as a quite a harsh headmaster. Sometimes when you listen to him, he's a very good orator. He was. He died now. But he doesn't dress anything up in religion. He rejected all kinds of organised religion and dogma and ideology and things. So yeah, something I've definitely found very helpful. And have a look through these guys and see what resonates for you.